How are you?
Hi, everybody.
Welcome to OnCrawl's SEO in Orbit webinar series, the first ever series sending SEO into space. SEO in Orbit is a series of webinars running through June 24th, taking you on a trip through the galaxy of technical SEO. So watch the webinars. After each one, join us on Twitter to vote for the top tip you get by our incredible guests, including Ian today. And we will send all of the top tips we get into space for real on June 27th. And we will keep you posted on that, of course. In the meantime, participate on Twitter using the hashtag OnCrawlInOrbit. And please, we would like to be in trending topic today. Or head to oncrawl.com/SEO in Orbit for more information. Today we will be talking about log files and more exactly about a results-focused approach to log file analysis. So I'm Alice Roussel, and I will be your host for this episode. I'm a technical SEO specialist here at OnCrawl, where my ideal day is spending time studying Google patterns and playing around with log lines. Our guest today is Ian. So again, Ian, thank you for being here today with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Ian is a founder of Portent, a clearlink digital agency. Portent provides paid and organic search and social media content and analytics services to B2B and B2C brands, including Patagonia, Princess, Lionheart, and Tumi. Ian's professional specialties and favorite topics are marketing strategy, search history, and all things nerdy. He spends far too much time poring over Amazon search patterns, Google rankings, and my favorite one, natural language processing theory. His random educational backgrounds includes a BA in history from UC San Diego and a degree in law from UCLA. So you have a pretty nice background. Do you want to add something?
I think you covered it pretty well. The only thing I'll say is we're in Seattle and it does really usually rain here in spite of what you're seeing behind me in the windows. So
pretty nice weather in Seattle, right?
Yeah. Right now anyway.
So we can go into our discussion today. So we'll be talking about log files. So before we start with the questions, maybe you can define what is a log file, what is a log line?
Sure, yeah. So a log file is a text file stored on a web server. And log files can log all sorts of different data. I'm going to talk strictly about web server log files. And basically, it is this text file. And every time any client, a browser, a bot, anything, requests any file from a website, it adds a line to the log file. And each line includes certain information. This can change a little bit depending on the site and the server, but usually it's going to include the refer. So whatever other website or thing was clicked or viewed or used to find its way to that item of information. It's going to include the user agent and the IP address. So the user agent being whatever type of browser or bot, so Googlebot, Chrome, Mozilla, whatever, and the IP address, so whatever the numeric address is of that client. It's going to include when the visit happened, date and time, and it's going to include the URL of the page or file listed, so the unique address of that page or file on the server. And then it's going to report also the status code, so exactly what happened, was the file found, which is for 200, 200, whether it's early here, by the way, it's only 8 a.m., so my brain's not totally in here. So 200 would mean the file was found, 301, 302, 310, 3 whatever means that the file did not exist, but the browser was told to go somewhere else, the client was told to go somewhere else, or a 400 code or a 500 code. I'm not going to go any further into that. It's also going to include some specific little bits of information like how many kilobytes the file was. That's probably the most important one actually, is how much was transferred when the browser or bot hit that file.
Okay, nice. Do you want me to add something specific about that, or can we jump into the questions?
I think we can jump into the questions. One very quick thing is I'm going to talk about hits, and in the analytics world, hits, everybody cringes when you say a hit because a hit is not an accurate measure. In terms of a log file though, a hit is an accurate measure. Every line in a log file is a hit. So just keep that in mind as I say hits, and hopefully, Avinash, if you're listening to this, you're not going to reach through the internet and punch me in the face for using the word hit. So.
Okay, nice. So our first question to begin with our subject today is, we know that one of the top use of log file monitoring is to get an accurate view of how frequently Googlebots visit a website URLs and which URLs are visited. So why are logs the best method to do this, according to you?
So someone here at Portent taught me this great phrase, which is a single source of truth, meaning there is one defined place where you're going to get the most accurate measure. And log files, in terms of web traffic, are the single source of truth. You know that if something on a web server is accessed, it's going to appear in a log file one way or another. Any file on a server that is hit, and you see there's the word hit in any way, shape, or form by any visiting client is going to show up in a log file, assuming the server is correctly configured. There is no more accurate source of truth. JavaScripts that are used to fire analytics pixels, like Google Analytics, are only as accurate as their configuration, but also bots may not fire those JavaScripts. A browser that does not support JavaScript may not fire it. Slow page load can impact that, but no matter what happens with that JavaScript, you know that hit is still being recorded in the log file. So it is the single source of truth as far as web traffic.
And I guess you remember that in 2017, John Mueller said that log files were underrated. Would you say that today in 2019 it is still the case? Or would you say that more and more people tend to use the log file analysis in the SEO?
Given how much time I have to spend persuading people to let us have access to their log files, I would say that no, they are still badly underrated. I would also say that when we go and talk to a client about something a previous agency has done for them in SEO, very few of them say that they analyze log files. So it may be that people are starting to pay more attention, but I mean, it's been 19, 20 years that log files have been around, and I haven't seen a ton of attention paid to them in all that time for SEO. So we're talking, there's still a very small number of people out there who are using them.
Yeah, I agree with you. So let's get into some examples and what we can learn from them. So we can find areas of your site where the crowd budget is wasted, and Google spends a lot of time trying to understand your SEO, and sometimes, I mean, in this case, Google will spend a lot of time on pages that aren't important for your SEO instead of taking the time to go through your money pages. So this is a pretty classic case when you run into a log analysis. So do you have a specific case of dealing with this kind of poorly distributed crowd budgets?
So the best example I have is from a couple of years ago when we were working with a client who had a pretty big site, and every page of this site had a forward this page to a friend link, and also a request more information link. And when the client launched the site, relaunched their site, their rankings just plunged, and they couldn't figure out why. And everything looked fine. When we looked in the Google Index, when we looked at regular site traffic, when we looked at all this information, everything looked fine. The on-page SEO was great. And then when we started looking at the log files, we saw that Googlebot was hitting hundreds of thousands of pages that were not visible on the site. And what it turned out was that Googlebot was hitting all of these request more information links and send to a friend links. When they relaunched their site, they thought they had removed those links from their site. So you couldn't see them on the page. There was no way that an SEO might go in there and just look at the page and say, oh, this is the problem. They left the links on there, but they were invisible. So when Google hit the page, they were still seeing all of these links. Google was spending 90% of its time crawling all of these invisible links, and only about 10% of its time crawling pages with meaningful content. That's probably the best example I've ever had, actually, of using a log file, because again, if you think about the single source of truth, if we hadn't looked in the log file, it would have taken us months to realize that there were these invisible links with little teeny 1x1 pixel images in the Ahrefs that were sending traffic. Maybe not months, but certainly weeks to figure that out.
And how would you advise an SEO to use some metrics related to the log analysis to measure the improvement of the SEO actions using log file analysis?
What we'll usually look for is, we don't look for quantity so much as quality. So we're looking for, we don't necessarily care if Googlebot's hitting a site more or less often after we do an analysis and make changes. We're looking to see whether Googlebot and Bingbot are actually hitting the right pages on the site. Are they accessing pages that we want them to access? Or is Googlebot spending time hitting pages and files that we don't want it to have to hit? Or is it completely missing content and just not accessing certain pages? Those are all good ways to tell whether a crawl is, whether a bot's behaving the way we want. The other thing is we'll look to see, how many 404 responses, how many 302 responses, how many 5 whatever responses, and how many 200 responses that bot's getting, because Google Search Console may not give you the most accurate data for that. So you want to look in the log file and gather that as use that as a metric as well.
Okay. And so we can track the attention Google pays to different types of pages. We just talk about your money pages versus your, I would say, garbage pages. So we know how Google deal with your different type of pages, and how Google understand or try to understand your technical SEO issues on your website. So have you run into this before, into the analysis of how Google deal with your type of pages depending on what pages they are and what the kind of technical SEO issues you can have on those pages?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of the time, again, single source of truth. We've seen changes in behavior, changes in the way Google supports certain kinds of directives. So, rel canonical is a big one. Google is very clear, not very clear, but they're pretty clear in saying that's a suggestion that they may not always follow rel canonical. Rel next previous is another one where if we watch how Google is crawling and working its way through pages, we can understand whether rel canonical, rel next previous, some other directive declaration is actually working on a site. That's probably the single best. So that's, again, single source of truth. That's how we use log files to tell whether a particular command, I guess I'm trying to find the right word here, that we've given Google is working. We'll also look for no index, no follow, see whether Google's actually obeying that directive. We can see whether a no index, no follow is working now, whether it worked before, did Google suddenly start to ignore it? We can look at all sorts of things like that.
So you just talked about rel next prev, and we went into a real pagination gate recently. So what do you think about that kind of communication from Google, like this one, where Google told us we are no longer using rel next prev? What are you thinking about that?
I mean, I'm always a skeptic when Google comes to us with something like rel next prev. I mean, I'll always recommend to clients that they use it, but I'm a skeptic, and I can use log files to make sure that Google is not or is not using that particular directive. So again, if you kind of look at how, if I look at how bots behave on paginated pages, and we've been doing this for a while, we can watch to see whether Google suddenly changes the way that they're crawling those pages. Are they suddenly getting caught up in pagination tunnels where they weren't getting caught before? Are they starting to crawl pages in a rel next, in a pagination cycle, but no longer in order? So rel next prev is no longer working because Google is no longer treating next as next. Those are all things that we'll kind of look for, and rel next prev is a really good example. Thank you.
So if we go into the details of a URL, I mean analyzing a specific URL, we can see the correlation between how long a page has been online and its popularity. So have you seen this in the wild?
Yeah, I mean, for online publishers, this is really common, right? So we can look and we can say, okay, we've had this page online for a week, and all of a sudden Google's crawling it, and a week later it's showing up in the rankings, right? And again, log files are a great way to figure that out, right? They're a great way to know and understand whether a page has actually been viewed by Google. So sometimes we'll have clients, but again, particularly online publishers with really big sites, we'll have them publish some new content, and it won't show up in Google yet, or it won't be getting organic traffic, and they'll start to get worried. And we can look and at least say, oh yeah, Google has not looked at this page yet, or Google has looked at this page, so let's wait a while and see whether it's worked. And again, because Google Search Console may not be completely up to date, the log files are a great way to know, because we can find out within minutes, if we're analyzing log files in real time, within minutes whether Googlebot has landed on a particular page.
Yeah, and we can see how bot behavior can be predictive of indexing and page performance. So could you give us an example from your own experience at measuring the time for a page to be crawled and then to be popular or to receive its first SEO visit?
There's not a lot of consistency. It's a little hard to say, there's no perfect correlation of a hit on a page by a bot and when that page starts showing up in the index. I can tell you that it is pretty consistent. So if we see Googlebot land on a page, it's a pretty good sign that that page will show up somewhere in the SERPs a short time later. And a short time can mean anywhere from 30 minutes to 30 days. The bigger the publisher and the more, and I'm going to get all sorts of people are going to start yelling at me on Twitter, but the more popular a site, the more acknowledged that site is as a source of authority, the quicker it will show up in the Google index. So if you're, I can't say who, but if you're a top 20 news site and Googlebot hits a page, if that page doesn't show up in the Google index within an hour, we're really worried. If you're a less well-known publication and Googlebot lands on a page and it's more than a week before the page shows up in the index, then we get worried. So we're going to look at it based on a sliding scale. We're not necessarily going to worry or not worry based on a hard number that we always assign. So we're not going to say, for all websites, you should show up and rank within a week. That's not going to happen.
So how would you recommend or advise to someone that wants to improve the time between the page being first crawled and then the page being popular or receiving its first SEO visit? What would you do as an SEO to improve this time frame?
So just getting a page to show up in the index sooner and getting it ranking more quickly. I mean, there's a host of different things. I'm always going to lean towards technical SEO first because I also am a technical SEO. But there are non-technical things to do as well. I'll start with the technical. Obviously performance, right? The more quickly Google can crawl your site, the more pages they will probably put into their index. And this is probably where John Miller will get really mad at me, but certainly, the EAT, right, what everybody's talking about now, that has an impact on how quickly you show up in the index, or at least how quickly you become popular. And again, I'm going to get yelled at for that. I'm just trying to think of things that won't get me in trouble. You need to make sure that pages are linked as high up in the site hierarchy as possible. We know that when we look at log files, it's pretty clear that Googlebot, at least the first few times it crawls your site, is starting at the top of the site hierarchy and working its way down. Make sure that a page is, I'm trying to come up with the right way to explain this. Make sure that a page, that the linking structure within your site demonstrates the importance of the page. If you want a page to rank more quickly after it has been crawled, you need to make sure that multiple pages on your site link to it, and preferably that they do so from either primary, secondary nav. We know that for a fact. And that's just common sense if you think about it.
So another, this one is maybe a tough question. So we know that log files are not standardized. So are some formats best for SEO? And if so, which ones? You were talking earlier about what we can find as an information into a log line. Is there something specific that we should retry from the log lines in order to perform a very accurate log analysis?
So there's a lot of different formats. W3C is probably the most common. Apache log format. There's a ton of them out there. The most important thing is to make sure that your server is configured to store the right data in those log files. So when you first set up a server, it's possible that the web server will not be configured to store, say, the referrer, or it may not store the user agent, or it may not store the response code. And this sounds ridiculous that a web server wouldn't do this, but it's true. I mean, I've seen servers set up that way. So more than worrying about the log file format, worry about whether that information is being stored. Once you understand what to look for in a log file, sorry, there's a siren going by outside. Once you understand what you're supposed to get out of a log file, it's pretty easy to interpret no matter what the format is. You just want to make sure that the right data is being stored there. And the things you must have are referrer, user agent, obviously date and time, and response code. If you have those things, you can generally figure out the rest.
So in addition to all the cases you have just mentioned until here, what are the main reasons you would advise SEOs to run into log file analysis?
I have to come back to single source of truth. If you are an SEO and you really want to get an accurate look at how Google and Bing and other bots are crawling your site, you have to look at the log files. There is no other way to do it, right? I'm all about removing levels of abstraction. Things like Google Search Console are helpful, but they introduce levels of abstraction. They are showing Google's interpretation of what they have seen when they visited your site. You don't want to see that. You want to see how Google visited your site with no interpretation. That's what log files will do for you. And that's why I usually advise it. There are so many possible use cases, right? Finding broken links, finding redirect chains, finding temporary redirects, whatever. But what really matters, what really you have to understand is there's no predefined set of cases that make log files useful. It's the idea that a log file will give you that completely unedited, almost raw set of data on how bots are crawling your site.
Okay, so maybe we can jump on some quick questions. So do you have a favorite technical trick?
Well, using GREP is probably my favorite. GREP, the Linux command line tool because you can sift through a really large file really quickly. And I can provide a link on Twitter, or I can provide you with a link that folks can get to learn how to use it. That's one of my favorites, just because it's a really quick way to sift through a file and narrow, just to reduce the amount of data, because log files can be enormous. I mean, on a really well-trafficked site, they can be millions of lines for just a day or two. So you want to be able to do things like filter out all image requests, or filter out all non-bot requests, or just grab Googlebot requests. And most of the desktop tools can't handle a file when it gets that large.
And do you have a list favorite technical questions that you get often asked?
Why should I give you my log file? That's my least favorite. That's at the top of the list. Everything else comes in a distant second. I do not understand people's opposition to providing their SEOs with a log file. There's no real security issues unless your website or your log file are configured pretty badly. It's easy to do. You can always just zip up the file and send it. So that's my least favorite question. And again, I'm going to get yelled at for that one, but apparently that's what I'm here to do today. So, that's my least favorite.
I totally understand, yes.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite Googlebot?
A favorite Googlebot? Probably the little one that John Mueller is carrying all around the world and taking pictures of in different places. No, Googlebot smartphone right now is certainly the one that I look for the most. I actually look at Googlebot image quite a bit. We've seen we've seen a lot of issues show up with image crawls and them interfering with or impacting overall crawls in a site. So Googlebot image is another big one, but Googlebot smartphone is a big one to look at right now.
And do you have a favorite planet?
A favorite planet? I'm gonna go with Mars. Mars is definitely one of my favorites. Has a lot of potential. It's sort of like a log file. No one's really thought about the technical implications, but I think there's a lot to be found there. So.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah,
We never know.
Mm-hmm.
So we will talk about your questions. So if you have some, you can ask your question on Twitter using the hashtag OnCrawl in orbits, or directly within the chat. So let's see if we have some questions for you.
And I don't have Twitter up right now, so I'll need you to tell me what the questions are.
I will tell you. Let's see. What do we have?
Here, I'll take a look too.
So we have first question. What is your favorite argument to get access to your client's log data?
Okay, so you heard some of that. I mean, I'm not very diplomatic, so the first thing I always ask clients is, why not? Like, why are you not giving me access to this file? What's the issue here? And then I'll try to help them understand why something is not necessarily a big problem. One of my favorite arguments really is, I got to come back again to single source of truth. We can go through your site by hand. We can crawl it with our own crawlers. We can look at the Google index. We can look at Google Search Console. The only way we're going to have a 99% accurate measure of how Googlebot sees your site is looking at the log files. We can do it faster, we can do it easier, and we can do it more accurately. So that's probably my favorite argument for getting access to the log file.
Interesting approach. Do we have some other questions? Another one. You mentioned that there were no security concerns with sharing log files. Can you explain?
Well, I mean, all someone has to do is zip up the file and send it to me. So I don't need access to your server to get a look at log files. And your log file should not, it should only be showing things that Googlebot and people are accessing, right? It should only be showing things that are accessible to the public anyway. So there's no security concern there unless your web server or site are incorrectly configured and Googlebot and the public are finding their way to things that they shouldn't be, in which case you probably want me to find that anyway and tell you. But there's absolutely there's no security risk in showing me that file. Giving me access to that file on your server, yeah, I mean, obviously then you're giving me access to your server. That's a potential security issue. I'll behave myself personally. I'm not going to do anything bad, but I understand why you might want to zip it up and send to me. But again, a server log file should just be showing hits on publicly available files. There is no security risk to that.
We have another question from Jenny Hill. Ideas why images are so often an issue with log files, perhaps because servers hang with the weight, slowness of uncompressed images.
You broke up a lot there. I'm really sorry. I'm gonna hop on Twitter and take a quick look at that. Can you read that to me again though?
Yeah, you can see it directly in the chat. It is this one. Ideas why images.
Oh, look at that, it's right in chat, sorry.
No.
Why are images so often, are so often an issue in log files? I worry about it because sometimes we have images that are being crawled and indexed in the Google image search that shouldn't be. I see a lot of sites that still use some form of invisible images to try to lay things out. I know that's surprising, but then also there's a lot of images that are loaded now that are lazy loaded, so loaded as you scroll down a page. But those may be important images, and Googlebot seems to have trouble sometimes crawling images that only load on only lazy load. So we want to know whether Googlebot's crawling those images or whether Googlebot is just not seeing them at all. Image size can be an issue as well, just the raw size of an image. Generally, the logs are not the best place to get that data. Generally, you're going to want to use some kind of crawler of your own to figure that out.
We have another question from Dane Richards. Hi, Dane. Is there a benefit to monitoring log files in real time?
There can be. It depends on how busy the site is. If you're getting a few thousand visits a day, I don't think you need to worry about it. If you're getting a few million visits a day, there can be real benefits, right? Because if you're getting that, and this is probably not a great correlation, but if you're getting millions of visits a day from people, there's a good chance you're getting a lot of traffic from Googlebot as well, and you want to be able to analyze that as quickly as possible. Like I said, that's not a perfect correlation. Sometimes really busy sites don't get a ton of crawls from Googlebot, but real-time analysis, the bigger your site, the more often you add content, the closer to real time you want to get to log file analysis.
I guess we are all set with the questions. So again, Ian, thank you for being here. It was great having you. Don't forget to vote for Ian's best tips on Twitter from this webinar using the hashtag OnCrawl in orbit. Thanks for traveling with us today through this corner of the technical SEO space. Swing by OnCrawl.com to start your free trial and join us for the next episode of SEO in Orbit on May 15th for creating entity-based content that converts with our guest, JP Chairman. See you soon. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, everybody.